Hello viewers, welcome to today's session. In our previous session, we discussed about desertification. What is desertification and what are the causes of desertification? All these topics are under block 4 of the course MSD 017, that is Challenges to Sustainable Development. Learners, today we will be discussing about the impact and control of desertification. We know desertification is like creation of desert-like conditions in any ecosystems, which is because of lack of rainfall, very high temperatures, high speed wind, and changes in the structure and functioning of the soil. Because of which, what is happening to other components of the ecosystems, how does other flora and fauna are affected by desertification, all these things we will be discussing in today's session. Learners, if you talk about desertification, there are 4 main areas which are affected. Because it is related to soil, it is related to the presence of water on the surface or below the ground. Basically, desertification has an impact on number 1, irrigated croplands. Learners, you know that we are dependent on water for irrigation, and most of the water that is happening and that is possible because of irrigating our fields. Most of the times rainfall is not available in plenty. So there are certain areas, certain fields which are irrigated, and in view of over irrigating these crops, because of too much of subsidies and free electricity that we often promise to our farmers, there is a tendency of over irrigating these fields. When there is over irrigation in the soils which are already rich in salts, what happens because of desertification is that the soil becomes rich in certain salts, which we call it as the saline soils. So at present, those areas of the lands which are dependent upon the artificial sources of irrigation, they are mostly affected by desertification. Number 2 are the rain-fed croplands. Yes, we have certain parts of our agricultural land which is totally dependent upon the rains for meeting their water requirements. Rainfall is unpredictable today because of climate change. There is rainfall occurring for a few days, and that too, that the intensity of rains in those days is very high. So what we mean to convey by this is that their rainfall patterns have altogether been changed because of the climate change and other related phenomena. The chances of erosion happening because of water or wind are peculiarly high in those areas. So the lands which are dependent upon the rainfall, they also suffer because of desertification like problems. Then there are grazing lands. Those lands which are devoted for grazing purposes, because we have a huge cattle population in our country. And to feed this cattle stock, there are grazing lands, rangelands, which are also overexploited. Because of the increase in population of the cattle and because of already deforestation and other, you can say other pressures of the land, the range which is available for grazing is very less. So because of this phenomena, our rangelands, our grasslands and those vegetation which can be used as fodder by these cattle is also under threat. And then there are dry woodlands, because most of the fuel wood requirement is met by the forest, by the dried leaves and certain parts of the forest which are being taken up by the communities for obtaining fuel wood and also for meeting their various requirements. So what happens because of this, because of deforestation, because of cutting down of trees for meeting their various requirements, the tree cover, the vegetative cover is reduced and it has a pressure on the quality of the land, and eventually it leads to desert-like conditions. So these impacts were basically, you can say that there are four main land areas which at present are suffering because of desertification like problems. So we have seen in our previous session that because of the so many factors, including urbanization, industrialization, faulty agricultural practices, because of all these factors, there are main four types of land masses which have started showing adverse impacts. So at one hand, we have the agricultural land which is irrigated through means of canals. We have agricultural land which is getting its water requirements through rainfalls. Then there are forest lands and the grazing lands which are affected by the deforestation adversely. When you look at these different areas, which are affected by the desertification like conditions prevailing at the place, you will also notice that there is a substantial change in the biodiversity, in the soil characteristics, in the water table of these areas. And further, this has an impact on the ecosystem and weather conditions of those regions. So, when you look at the other causes, this was with reference to the land areas which are suffering because of desertification. But then there are other impacts also. There is a depletion of vegetative cover, because of deforestation, because of clearing of the land for various purposes, because of undue pressures of human population growth. The loss of vegetative cover is exaggerated, and it is more because of desert-like conditions, because the optimum conditions which are necessary for the plant growth, which include sufficient rainfall, sufficient moisture in the soil, and other abiotic and abiotic factors. So, in the absence of all these characteristics, both physical, chemical, and the biological, there is altogether loss of the vegetative cover. The areas are getting denuded. When you look at the forest, when you look at the physical map of any region which is suffering from the desertification, you will find that this region is not having any plant growth. First of all, we are cutting down, and secondly, because of unfavorable climatic conditions, it does not support the growth of the green plants or the trees. So, by virtue of deforestation, we will find that there is a clear loss of vegetative cover at those places. And because of the loss of the vegetative cover, because of the trees being cut down, there is an adverse effect on the biodiversity which is dependent on these forests. And this biodiversity includes the birds also, the reptiles also, the herbivores, the different types of organisms which are dependent on the forest or the grazing lands, or the different types of trees which are present in the natural surroundings. Loss of biodiversity is actually a disruption of the ecological balance, a disruption of the food chains that naturally exist in the ecosystems. And altogether, it has an adverse effect on the quality of you can say natural settings at those places. So we can say that deforestation occurs also because of the cutting down of trees, and also because of deforestation, because of desertification also, many times we find that the trees or the flora and fauna are at a loss because of changes in the weather conditions happening at a place at a given time, and in the long run it may lead to desert-like conditions. Eventually there may be loss of the vegetative cover, and the dependent biodiversity may also get eliminated. And in view of this, it is also found that there is an impact on, or there is a pressure on the grazing lands also. As we have discussed, we have the highest cattle population in the world, but to support that we have a limited piece of land. We do not have lands dedicated for the grazing purposes. You must have seen, particularly in those regions which have a high livestock population, the fodder available for these grazing animals is very limited, is of inferior quality, and they are getting mostly from the nearby areas. So most of the times the quality is not so good, which is essential for meeting the nutritional requirement of these cattle also. And secondly, it is not so good in terms of the quantity also, because as the forests are getting lost, in a similar manner, the grasslands are also
not in a good shape. The grasslands are also exploited for various anthropogenic purposes, and because of which there is a pressure on the grazing lands. What happens eventually is that most of the cattle are now feeding on the common property resources, the common areas, the grazing lands below the foothills, or you can say in the hilly regions you find them, and therefore what is happening is that it has a deep impact on the ecology of that place, because grasslands serve various functions. They are not just the food to these grazing population, but also they help in maintaining the climatic conditions of that region. Also, the biodiversity which is found in the grasslands in terms of the reptiles, deer population, and other herbivores, it is very different as compared to that of the forest. So we cannot ignore these important group of species which are vital for the not only the livestock population, but also they are important for the whole ecosystems. So there is an impact on the grazing lands. There is an impact on the fodder pressures. The quality of the fodder is not so good. It affects the health of the cattle who are dependent upon these lands. So desertification also leads, because the climatic conditions are not favorable. In the long run, it reduces the grazing lands further. The grasses, the shrubs, the herbs which are growing, which are being eaten up by these cattle, whether it is cow, whether it is goat, sheep, whatever be the animals which are dependent, the poultry, etc., all are dependent upon the grazing land for various purposes. So it has an impact on these resources also, which are taken up by these cattle. Then there is an economic impact also. Desertification is not just the change in the ecosystems or change in the climatic conditions, but it has an economic impact also. Because when the land is not suitable for agriculture, when it is not supporting the growth of the livestock, when it is not supporting the populations at a given place, it impacts the productivity, it impacts agricultural productivity, it has an impact on the livelihoods of the rural people. So if you calculate the economic impact of desertification, it also comes to be huge. It has a huge impact because it threatens the proper living conditions of the people, because there are several group of the communities who are dependent upon the natural ecosystems for obtaining their various you can say for various benefits, you can say. So it reduces the productivity of the land. It creates competition for the scarce resources. It has an impact on the living conditions of the people who are dependent on these resources, and the economic impact comes out to be huge. Then climate change is also, you can say, aggravated by desertification like phenomena. Although it is vice versa, because of climatic conditions change, the desertification process has been you can say more rapid. But altogether, this is also true that desertification also leads to climate change condition, because soil, they are the great reservoirs of carbon stored in them. When the nature of the soil changes, there is a reduced carbon sequestration, and in view of this, there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. So therefore it also leads to climate change like events. It leads to increase in temperature. It also has an impact on the weather, climatic conditions of those places. So degraded lands, actually they lose their capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. As it has been said, there is more tendency of the soil to absorb the carbons than the forests. So this is also worsening the global climate change and leading to warming. So all these types of events are very much related to desertification phenomenon. Water scarcity is more, you can say, is more today because of desertification process. The world over, we are struggling to make available the water to the population for meeting their various requirements, including the residential requirements, the agricultural, commercial, industrial, and so on. So desertification has resulted in the deteriorated quality of the surface water, groundwater resources, and particularly the populations which are living in the water scarce conditions, they are affected more. So it is predicted that the dryland population, which is vulnerable to water stress, it will be around 178 million by 2050. So this is a worrisome fact, because we are water stressed, and in the times to come, it may pose a great threat to our healthy survival on this planet, not only us but other creatures which are there on this planet, the plants, the animals who are dependent on them. So desertification like conditions further leads to water scarcity, water stress, water scarce conditions. And many cities of India, they are feeling this threat that the day zero will come soon, where the water availability will seriously be a question mark, will be real threat in the times to come. And it has an impact on the people also. See, desertification doesn't only have impact on the ecosystems and all the other climatic and other variables, but it has an impact on the people also who are living in those areas. You must have heard about the migration phenomena taking place. People, rural population particularly, migrating to urban areas. It is predicted that India, if you see, by 2050, 60% of the population will be living in the urban areas. So this is a classic example of migration. People migrate to cities in search of better opportunities, better living conditions, and so on. When the land is unsuitable, when the climatic conditions are not favorable, when the rainfall is scanty, because of poor quality of the soil and other things, the tendency to migrate to the urban areas has increased. The rural men leave the agriculture behind on the shoulders of the women and migrate to urban areas in search of some other employment and livelihood opportunities. So it creates a kind of an imbalance in the society, because most of the work related to agriculture and household is now on the shoulders of the women. And water scarcity, as you know, it is impacting the women and the children more. It ultimately leads to poor quality of the life of both the people who have migrated to urban areas and also to those who are now living in the rural areas. And the indigenous population who are living in those areas for long, they also suffer, because there is insecure land tenure. It affects the ability of the people and communities to fight the climate change, and it is further, enhanced by land degradation phenomena. So communities are also affected because of desertification. So now the question which comes before us is how to combat, how to mitigate desertification, what can be done. The first and foremost thing which is essential is water management. How do you manage this resource? It is not just an economic resource, but it is also very much essential for our survival. What measures are we taking so that more innovative practices we are taking in terms of agriculture and other uses where the water is required in large quantities? Water management is very essential so that we are also able to meet our requirements. We are also able to save for the bad weather times, and we are also able to efficiently use this water for meeting our various requirements. Then soil conservation is also equally important, because the soil actually holds the water. If the soil is such that it is denuded, it doesn't have the water holding capacity, it will not be able to store water, even if it rains properly, even if we are managing it properly. So soil conservation methods through various means, which we have already studied in our various sessions, that what are the methods of soil conservation we must adopt. Afforestation is very important, plantation of the trees, and community involvement. People must come forward, people must be involved. Their role in decision making, participation is very important to ensure that we are able to conserve soil and water to control the desertification. And United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification was established in 1994. It is a legally binding environment convention which links in, development to environment and sustainable land management. And the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, it aims to combat desertification and also to control the ill effects of drought. India ratified the convention in December 1996, so we are a part of it. And similarly, 14th Conference of Parties to the UNCCD was held in India in 2019, and India is the co-president for 2019 to 2021. It was the co-president where all the efforts, recommendations to control the desertification were discussed and elaborately measures were taken. And learners, you must know about the Bond Challenge also, which is an international effort to bring 150 million hectares of forest, degraded and deforested land into restoration by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030. So it is a legally binding international effort towards control of desertification and reclaiming the land for various purposes. You must also know about SDG 15, which says talks about sustainably managing forests, combating desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and also halting biodiversity loss. So this is SDG 15, which is about life on land, and it is proposed by human to be achieved by 2030. So out of the 17 SDGs, this SDG 15 directly relates to desertification and gives recommendation for managing the problem of desertification through various efforts. So learners, we must conclude that desertification is, as you know, long-term failure to balance the demand and supply. Human activities like climate change, they are aggravating the situation, but we must think of introducing alternate livelihood, maintenance of water, soil conservation. All these things are very essential to control the effect of desertification. Thank you.